We all love a good, strange story that we can tell when we're around the campfire or celebrating a scary holiday like Halloween. But some of the scariest are the real stories that seem to defy logic, leaving us with a sense that there may very well be far more to this world than we might ever possibly understand. Number 5. On the 8th of July, 1913, Pearl Kieran from St. Louis and her friend Emily Grant Hutchings attempted to contact a relative of Emily's using a Ouija board. The two had been visiting a neighbor some time earlier when the neighbor claimed to make contact with Emily's relative through her own Ouija board, and they wanted to continue their communication. Emily bought a board and took it to Pearl's house, but Pearl seemed disinterested at first and had to be convinced to continue. At first, they didn't have much luck, but just as they were about to give up, the board started spelling out words at a ferocious pace. The first message they received read, "Many moons ago I lived. Again I come. Patience worth my name. Wait, I would speak with thee. If thou shalt live, then so shall I. I make my bread at thy hearth. Good friends, let us be merry." They asked her when she lived, and she replied with the dates 1649 to 1694. When asked where she lived when she was alive, she said her home was across the sea. Patience would continue to communicate with Pearl for many years, and her writings would go on to receive critical acclaim, turning Pearl into somewhat of a celebrity. Eventually, the Ouija board was no longer needed, as Pearl claimed to receive communications directly from the spirit, occasionally as pictorial visions of Patience's life as she traveled from England to America. She would describe her relationship with Patience as one of the most beautiful that can be the privilege of a human being to experience. Together, they would publish several novels that included Telka, The Sorry Tale, The Pot Upon the Wheel, and Hope True Blood, among others. They would also produce several short stories and many poems, 5 of which were listed as among America's finest, published in 1917. Pearl would communicate with Patience almost every night, and on some occasions, she would work on a novel, a play, and a poem at the same time. And between 1913 and 1937, she would produce nearly 4 million words. Though many skeptics and psychologists attempted to prove that the writings were just a strange story, no one was able to do so, as Pearl continued to produce writings in front of an audience with effortless fluidity. Their last communication happened on the 25th of November, 1937, and Pearl passed away from pneumonia on the 3rd of December that same year. Number 4. The Pyrus Map was discovered by German theologian Gustav Deismann when the historic Topkapi Palace was being prepared for conversion into a museum in 1929. He was cataloging antique items when he found a parchment of gazelle skin among a stack of items that were deemed to be worthless. Upon closer inspection, he realized that a map was drawn on the parchment, showing the outline of South America. He studied the map further and found that it had been drawn and signed by a Turkish cartographer named Pyrus. Pyrus served in the Turkish Navy, where he held the rank of admiral, and he claimed to have drawn the map with the use of 20 different maps and charts. Some were maps that showed the known world according to the 2nd century Greek knowledge, while others were Portuguese and Arabic, and one was drawn by Christopher Columbus. The map immediately caused a great deal of controversy in the world of cartography, as it appeared to show Antarctica, which was only discovered 300 years after the map was drawn. Added to this strange story is the fact that the continent is drawn as a landmass, as it would have appeared more than 6,000 years earlier, before being covered by its ice cap. Professor Charles Hapgood studied the map further and found that the map was drawn using a methodology that was not used by European cartographers until the late 16th century. And even this method wasn't completely accurate before the invention of the chronometer in 1760. Hapgood further found that the map was based on information older than 4000 BC, when sophisticated civilizations and properly defined languages did not yet exist, meaning that an ancient civilization with the skills to navigate Earth's oceans while documenting the lands they visited had existed at some point. He went on to theorize that the map was so accurate it would have been nearly impossible to draw without the use of aerial capabilities. Number 3. In March of 2003, a 44-year-old man named Andrew Carlson was arrested by the FBI after he had suspiciously turned an $800 investment into $350 million on the stock exchange in just 2 weeks. While he was interviewed, the FBI expected the usual runaround and denials of being an inside trader, but instead they were told a strange story that even they couldn't explain. For the following 4 hours, Carlson confessed to making 126 high-risk trades and explained that he had cashed in on every single one, since he knew without a doubt that they would pay off, since he was from 250 years in the future. At first, they brushed off his claims as a lie, with the Securities and Exchange Commission spokesperson stating that Carlson was either a lunatic or a pathological liar. He added that he could only have pulled this off with the use of inside information, and that he would sit in a jail cell on Rikers Island until he told them the truth and gave up his accomplices. But this never happened, though he did admit that he'd made an error in judgment, as he should have stopped trading earlier, but was taken by the thrill of making so much money. He suggested a plea bargain in which he would disclose the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden and a cure for AIDS. In an attempt to prove he was lying, the FBI searched for any information on the man, but they could find no record of his existence prior to 2002, 3 months before he was arrested. The strange story became even more bizarre, however, when his bail of $1 million was posted by an unknown individual on the 3rd of April when he was due to appear in court. On his way to the hearing, however, he disappeared and no one has seen or heard from him ever since. Number 2. Victor Goddard was an air marshal and senior commander in the Royal Air Force during World War II, having also served as a midshipman during the first year of World War I. In 1935, while flying his Hawker Hart biplane, he experienced an event that could only be described as a truly strange story. While on a flight from Andover, England to Edinburgh, Scotland, where he had been sent to inspect a disused airfield in a town called Drem, he experienced something that he couldn't explain. As he approached, he could see that the airfield was in a terrible state, with grass pushing up through the tarmac on the landing strip. He also noted that there were cattle on the airstrip, grazing on the grass that had started to grow. He made his notes and flew on, but heavy rains set in, and he started to have trouble with his plane. He lost his bearings and decided to turn back to the airfield to calculate his location. But as he approached the airfield once more, the torrential rain suddenly gave way to bright sunshine and clear skies. He looked down to the airfield, and to his astonishment, it was in perfect condition and in use. He saw mechanics wearing blue overalls walking around, and 4 yellow planes were parked on the runway, one of which was a model that he didn't recognize. This surprised him, as the RAF's planes were all painted silver, and the unrecognizable plane was a monoplane, which was not in use by the RAF yet at that time. Added to this was the fact that RAF mechanics only wore brown overalls, rather than the blue ones he was witnessing. At this point, the rain returned, and he made his way back to the base at Andover. When he reported his strange story to his superiors, it was shrugged off as a plea for attention. But in 1939, Drem Airfield was resurfaced and once again put to use by the RAF. By this time, RAF mechanics started wearing blue overalls as standard. Their planes were painted yellow, and they started using the first monoplanes, exactly as Goddard had seen on that day of his strange flight. Number 1. On the 20th of December, 1980, 19-year-old Jean Hilliard from Langby, Minnesota, had driven into town to meet with some friends for a night out. She headed home at about midnight, but decided to take a shortcut on an icy gravel road just north of Langby. She was driving her father's car, a Ford LTD, which was only rear-wheel drive and had no anti-lock brakes. At some point, the car started to slide on the ice, and she ended up crashing into a ditch by the side of the road. She had a friend that lived close by, so she decided to get out of the car and walk to his house to get help in temperatures that dipped below 20 degrees. She stated that as she climbed over a hill, thinking that the house would be just beyond it, she found that it wasn't, and she started to get frustrated and worried that she had gotten lost. She walked for a further 2 miles before finally spotting her friend's house through the trees. But she'd been out in the cold for such a long time, and before she could make it to the house, she blacked out. She would later learn that she'd made it as far as her friend's garden and had crawled onto the front step of his porch. Her friend, Wally Nelson, would later reveal that he spotted something on his front lawn, and when he went out to take a look, he was surprised to see Jean lying on the ground. He grabbed her by the collar, but found that she was completely frozen, and he describes skidding her onto the porch. He and a girlfriend attempted to put Jean in his truck, but because she was frozen stiff, she wouldn't fit, and they resorted to taking the other woman's car. When they arrived at the hospital, doctors were certain that she had already passed away, and if she hadn't, she wouldn't live much longer. Her body was frozen to the point that when they tried to inject her with a hypodermic needle, it simply snapped off. They resorted to placing heating pads on her body to thaw her out, and a pastor was called to start a prayer chain. By mid-morning, Jean suddenly woke up in spasms, and by noon she was awake and talking in coherent sentences. Due to the severe cold that her body had endured, doctors feared that she may contract infections from frostbite, and they considered amputating both of her legs. But she was ultimately sent home with no more than a few blisters on her toes that stayed numb for a while, and she eventually made a full recovery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.